Tonight, on the Phenomenon radio show, radio broadcast veteran Ray Hobbs, one of the world's most high-profile military experiencers, John Burroughs, researcher and author James Warrow, and filmmaker, YouTuber, and truth stalker, Professor Simon. Whitehall, England. Washington, D.C. U.S. Congressional UAP hearings. May 17th, 2022. How does the DoD and MOD view UAP technology? In a FOIA conducted by retired U.S. Air Force Sergeant John Burroughs, the MOD was asked, "Are you developing technology off of UAP?" Their response was, "We reviewed your request and Section 26 is a qualified exemption and is subject to public interest testing, which means that the information requested can only be withheld if the public interest in doing so outweighs the public interest in disclosure. Section 26(1)(b) has been applied to some of the information because it gives details of techniques which might be employed on future platforms. Compromise in these techniques years before implementation may result in a reduction in effectiveness and, more importantly, the likelihood that this technology could advance a foreign power's ability to gain tactical advantage." The balance of public interest was found to be in favor of withholding the information, given that, overall, the public interest is best served in not releasing any details of techniques, the knowledge of which would be more likely to provide tactical advantage to our enemies. Section 27(1), International Relations, has been applied to some information as it relates to information whose disclosure would be more likely to harm UK interest. Section 43 has been applied to some information as this was supplied from a third party and contains commercially sensitive information, the public release of which could harm that party's commercial interest. During the U.S. congressional hearings conducted on May 17th, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy asked Scott Bray, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, "Has our encounters with UAP altered the development of our offensive or defensive capabilities or sensor capabilities?" Bray's response was, "We'll save that for our closed-door session. It's clear the defense agencies are not only taking this seriously, but working on developing technology off of UAP encounters." The following is an extract from the book Weaponization of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. A slightly surprising update on the Rendlesham events appeared on a site named Above Top Secret, dated 13th of March 2015, from Christopher Kit Green, MD, PhD. This is a reply to the entire thread and will only address two issues that are common throughout many comments on this thread. They are, question 1, how could it be true that medical records such as John Burroughs could have been classified? Is this true? Is it sensible? What are the reasons? And question 2, what caused his injuries and several others present over the encounter with the odd air form that emitted the broadband Nemur? It is true, his records, about 1,000 pages, and to this day, still many hundreds are in fact legally classified. In my 46-year career as a medical officer and physician with the CIA, including as Staff Officer Chief of Medical Intelligence, Life Sciences Division, and Assistant National Intelligence Officer for Science and Technology, I had, until a year or so ago, only seen a handful of truly classified medical records, those of Adolf Hitler, John F. Kennedy's autopsy, and recently, John Burroughs. The reasons were different. When I was denied these records after many requests, even though I had a TS SCI clearances for almost 50 years, I was able to quickly determine that the reasons were quite simple. Medical records are usually not digital and easily sequestered in multiple locations, and almost impossible to find. These were and remain, except for recent years, in hand copy, scanned and separated from FOIA access, and even mine. The reasons, I was told by a current DoD and VA record staff, that inside the doctor's notes, the nursing notes, the specialist's notes are a myriad of references to special access projects and the names of other adjacent programs and projects that cannot be disentangled and which could uncover active and recent projects unrelated to Rendlesham. The reasons are not necessarily related to Rendlesham, and not all the connections relate to Rendlesham. This makes some sense operationally, but no sense ethically. John was hurt. He needed care, then, often, and now. He had injuries we now understand are related to narrow RF bandwidth that only in some cases in the past 5 years have become linked to the specific etiology of cardiac and other injuries he suffered. There are likely other persons and other injuries. So, question 1. Yes, his records were classified. Some remain classified. The reasons are not entirely ethical. Thank God that a couple of senators had the guts to push to disentangle that which was legitimately classified from those records that were needed to make the right decision about injuries sustained while on active duty. Period. It was true. It is sensible. It is not entirely the stuff to make us physicians very proud. Question 2. Broadband non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation caused the injuries. The RF is identified in a dozen classified and half a dozen unclassified studies on cardiology and neurological injuries, not thousands of reports. Very few physicians even care about this arcane area of research, and even fewer know about the injury sustained from near field to humans. The data is sparse. It is not properly peer-reviewed. It is not understood. It is not the subject of current research, and that is the truth. The decision that was made to grant medical disability to John was just. Some of the records will remain classified. Those of us in military and intelligence medicine can be proud that the right decision was finally, if belated, made. We should remain both vigilant and ashamed that our profession remains improperly darkened, and we should bring it into the light where we can. Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis's 2003 paper, published as consulting members to the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, NIDS, discussed high strangeness as an important part of UAP reports, which are categorized as anti-physical, titled Incommensurability, Orthodox and the Physics of High Strangeness, a 6-layer model for anomalous phenomena. The abstract states, the main argument presented in this paper is that the continuing study of unidentified aerial phenomena may offer an existence theorem for new models of physical reality. The current SETI program and its assumption of mediocrity place restrictions on forms of non-human intelligence that may be researched. A similar bias exists in the ufologists' often stated hypothesis that UAP, if real, must represent space visitors. Observing that both models are biased by anthropomorphism, the authors attempt to clarify the issues by surrounding high strangeness observations by distinguishing 6 layers of information that can be derived from UAP events, namely 1. Physical manifestations, 2. Anti-physical effects, 3. Psychological factors, 4. Physiological factors, 5. Psychic effects, and 6. Cultural effects. In a further step, they propose a framework for scientific analysis of unidentified aerial phenomena that takes into account the incommensurability problem. Among the effects are A. Sinking into the ground, shrinking in size, growing larger, or changing shape on the spot. B. Becoming fuzzy and transparent on the spot. C. Dividing into 2 or more craft, several of them merging into one object at slow speed. D. Disappearing at one point and appearing elsewhere instantaneously. E. Remaining observable visually while not detected by radar. F. Producing missing time or time dilation. G. Producing topological inversion or space dilation. Object was estimated to be of small exterior size or volume, but witnesses saw a huge interior many times the exterior size. H. Appearing as balls of colored, intensely bright light under intelligent control. Metric tensor paper analysis effects C, F, G, and H are reported by witnesses to the Rendlesham Forest events. Effects A, B, D, E, F, G, and H are allowed for by some form of space-time metric engineering, provided energy requirements are met. Effects F, G, and H are common to both Rendlesham and Vallée-Davis. The abstract continues in that the aforementioned behavior of UAPs is not fundamentally absurd. This apparent absurdity is merely a reflection of the cognitive mismatch or the incommensurability problem that exists between humans and the phenomenon. In this particular case, UAP are sending the message and we are the recipients. The message they are sending to us are icons. Icons fashioned by the phenomenon and sent to us via various sensory modalities. The difference between our respective cultures, biologies, sensory modalities, histories, dimensional existence, physical evolution, models of nature and science, etc., is directly responsible for our lack of understanding of the phenomenon and its message. We cannot see what UAP believe to be similarities in the message that is intended for us. These stated differences directly impact our conventions of interpretation in such a way as to impair our recognition of the similarity between the sign and the signified contained within the icons of the UAP message, further impairing our ability to see and understand the potential message. Rendlesham Forest and Andrew Pike, as reported in UFO Matrix Magazine, Volume 1, Issue 3. Andrew Pike was working on an officially funded plasma physics project during the time of the Rendlesham incident. This was the study of ball lightning, natural plasma glows, earth lights, and similar phenomena. Plasmas are electrified gas where the atoms have been split into the positively charged nuclei and negatively charged electrons. If you pump energy into the gas, it creates plasma. He somehow became embroiled in scientific investigations in Suffolk in late December 1980, unaware at the time that a UFO incident was developing. What he thought was a physics investigation was dangerously overlapping into the murky world of ufology. Quote, at that point, the two angles split into separate projects, but with common, gray, and very unofficial, almost secret overlaps. It was a right royal mess from day one. Of course, the two of us started knowing nothing of what was to become of the RFI. We just began by asking around about the red glows on an unofficial level. We asked locals, forest workers, and anybody interested in talking. Most were, except the forest workers, close quote. Andrew Pike, a qualified astrophysicist, writer and broadcaster specializing in astronomical anomalies and the history of science, has penned a new book questioning just what could have happened at two U.S. Air Force bases by Rendlesham Forest near Woodbridge, Suffolk, in December 1980. Due to high interest in the case, the British Ministry of Defense investigated and concluded Orford Ness Lighthouse had been responsible for what was seen on the two nights in terms of glowing orbs. Mr. Pike concludes in the book that the bizarre light seen may have been a natural phenomenon known as plasma or ball lightning, rather than coming from an alien UFO. Ball lightning, to give it the correct spelling, is just one of the issues discussed, as it goes on to say. But a lot of people have jumped on that comment and not read any further. Mr. Pike also suggests that the sightings of a triangular craft may have been down to a secret military steelcraft experiments using microwave technology, rather than anything of extraterrestrial origin. Quote, I believe microwave science fits the data well to enhance what might have otherwise been just another outbreak involving balls of light. I know what it was not. It was not a lighthouse. That does not fit unless you want to cherry pick the data. That is not science. That is scientific fraud. Close quote. One of the reasons this is important is because of this statement made by Ralph Noyes, who headed a division of the Central Staff of the Ministry of Defense. Quote, he never believed that UFOs were alien and favored the idea that they were a living force that could be created and or harnessed for both benign and offensive purposes. I think he believed that there had been research into such things that had both accidentally created UFOs as side effects of the experiments, and that had involved intrusions by these forces that were occurring because of laws outside of our levels of understanding of physics, possibly interdimensional. Close quote. Source, UFO Matrix Magazine, Volume 1, Issue 3, page 64. So it appears Andrew Pike was working on an officially funded plasma project. Was any of that project being funded by the MOD? True or false? Was the MOD conducting a plasma project in 1980? Were they conducting any kind of plasma test in the Rendlesham Forest area in 1980 using local military facilities and the tunnels located in Rendlesham Forest? Were there EM generators involved? Is it true Margaret Thatcher had all references of EM generators classified after our incident? It also appears that after the Rendlesham event took place, that two different projects evolved. True or false? How could there be secret overlaps if they were not classified projects involving the MOD? What's stated here is, quote, we just began by asking around about the red glows on an official level. Close quote. Official level? For who? From the book, The Rendlesham File, Andrew Pike continues and quotes, "I like the details given by Burroughs for several reasons. Amongst these is the fact that the interview with Burroughs for Fate magazine was done by a science writer, Antonio Hernandez, and as such would appeal more to a scientific investigation. Of course, that has not always been the case with the Rendlesham incident. Moreover, and perhaps the best reason is, Burroughs was pretty much left alone and was one of the few who did not get taken away by the Air Force Office of Special Investigation and similar agencies for a hypnotic and drug-induced interrogation, although in later years ufologists did spoil things and regress him hypnotically to the time to unlock hidden memories, which came as a bit of a disappointment, to say the least. A disappointment because I have never had much faith in this technique when it comes to getting at the truth. Even so, much of what Burroughs has said through the years is, in my opinion, far cleaner and pure to the actual events, excluding the regression. So what did Burroughs reveal in Fate magazine? He tells of how he had to walk quite a way until he came to a clearing. It was then that he saw an object, as he puts it, which all three also saw, Jim Penniston and Ed Cabanzak being the other two. However, he says that all three saw the object a little bit differently, which might be because they were at differing distances, or it might be due to other effects we will explore. Burroughs explains that they got pretty close, and although he was not able to make out a solid metallic object in the way Penniston did, he could see what he thought were legs at the base, which were touching the ground. The object Burroughs saw also appeared to have banks of lights, differently colored lights, and stuff appeared as the main object. It was these lights which threw off an image of like a craft, John stated. However, he makes a point that at his distance, he was unable to make out anything hard or metallic in this object. While he was close to the object, everything seemed and felt different. The sky did not seem the same. There was a weird feeling whereby everything he was doing was in slow motion and unfamiliar surroundings. He felt, quote, everything seemed slower than you were actually doing stuff, close quote. Once the object had gone, suddenly everything was familiar again and back to normal. This was interesting because at once it seemed similar to the stories we had already unearthed about strange electromagnetic clouds engulfing ships and planes, like the 1904 encounter with a ship at Philadelphia 40 years before the so-called Philadelphia experiment, the Bruce Gernon encounter, and, of course, the Philadelphia experiment itself, which had similar reports of strange detachments from reality, detachments which suddenly lifted. Moreover, the leaked drawing to Sky Crash did look like an electromagnetic effect. We will look closer at this strange effect later when we examine the effects of electromagnetic fields on the brain. It is also interesting that Burroughs then makes the point that they looked around and saw the lighthouse beam and the sky was also back to its normal self. They then saw the object again in the distance. It was at this point that they had chased the object for about an hour to an hour and a half. It seemed clear that there was no confusion with the lighthouse, which, as we have seen, simply does not cause these electromagnetic effects anyway. Although Burroughs was unclear whether a solid object existed, he was sure it was technological, but was confused. He was also unsure whether the government would have developed such technology in 1980. Quote, "It would just be hard to believe," close quote. He went on to say, "If they had the capabilities and technology to do what went on that night, it would just be hard to understand. We would be so far advanced in technology that we've been lied to for years." He was also surprised that the events happened on 3 nights, as if that had significance. This encounter seemed to have had a really deep impact on Burroughs, because he starts to question reality and what happens in the world, unsure of what to believe in and why the government handles UFOs in such a way. He seems really interested to know why it is as it is. He also seems concerned that nothing is done about it by his government. More research led Pike into a possible military experiment being carried out in the area. The strange colored balls of light reported at the forest were similar to Foo Fighters of World War II. Pike made a link between the use of radar and the sightings of Foo in the war. Nearby RAF Bautzen was heavily involved in radar research, microwave tests, and drone technology, and he was suspicious that a military experiment may have affected something near the twin bases. Pike also noted how a large portion of UFO reports come from areas in the proximity of airports and military bases. But was there any concrete connection with Rendlesham? Weather control and experiments in the ionosphere were examined, which could produce artificial lights. Mind games and electromagnetic fields were also possibilities involved, as Pike mentions how a team of scientists were fixing the perimeter fences at the bases after the incident occurred. What were they fixing? Orford Ness is Britain's answer to Area 51, and now one of Britain's most protected natural landscapes. For decades, however, it was the hidden nerve center of secret military research. The isolation of Orford Ness was vital to keeping secret the use of another revolutionary new technology. Pan Macmillan provides the following words, quote, "In 1936, Winston Churchill asked the physicist Sir Robert Watson Watt to develop a death beam or a magic eye to counter the growing threat of German airborne aggression. Under the cloak of utmost secrecy, he had a small team of brilliant scientists moved into the manor. Stables and outbuildings were converted into workshops, and the first receiver and transmitter towers were built. Just 18 months later, RAF Bautzen became the first fully operational radar station in the world." Nick Redfern has referred to a Project Kugelblitz that makes some fascinating connections to include Edgewood Arsenal and Kirtland Air Force Base. The atmospheric plasmas, which were believed to be the cause of so many UFO reports, were still barely understood, said the MOD, and the magnetic and electric fields that emanated from plasmas could adversely affect the human nervous system. And that was not all. Clark and Anthony revealed that Volume 3 of the report refers to research and studies carried out in a number of foreign nations into UAPs, atmospheric plasmas, and their potential military applications. That such research was of interest to the MOD is demonstrated in a loose minute of 4 December 2000 called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena DI-55 Report, which reveals Director General, Research and Technology will be interested in those phenomena associated with plasma formations, which have potential applications to novel weapon technology. And it wasn't just the British Ministry of Defense and the Russians who recognized the potential military spin-offs that both plasma and ball lightning offered, if they could be understood and harnessed, of course. Official documentation that has surfaced in the United States reveals that only 2 years after pilot Kenneth Arnold's now historic UFO encounter over the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, on the 24th of June 1947, the U.S. military secretly began looking into ways to exploit such plasma. While the U.S. Air Force was busying itself trying to determine whether UFOs were alien spacecraft, Soviet inventions, or even the work of an ultra-secret domestic project, the U.S. Department of Commerce was taking a distinctly different approach. In its search for answers to the UFO puzzle, the DOC was focusing much of its attention on one of the most mystifying and controversial of all Fortean phenomena: ball lightning. A technical report, Project Grudge, published in 1949 by the Air Force's UFO Investigative Unit, detailed the findings of the DOC's Weather Bureau with respect to ball lightning, which it believed was connected to normal lightning and electrical discharge. The phenomenon, said the DOC, was spherical, roughly globular, egg-shaped or pear-shaped, many times with projecting streamers, or flame-like irregular masses of light, luminous in appearance, described in individual cases by different colors, mostly reported as deep red or often as glaring white. Possibly unknown outside of official circles, until I made the discovery at the U.S. National Archives, Maryland, 2 years ago, is the fact that a complete copy of the Air Force's Project Grudge document was, somewhat surprisingly, shared with U.S. Army personnel at the Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, in early 1950. Even more surprising is a curiously worded entry contained in the covering letter with the Air Force to Edgewood staff that accompanied the Grudge report. Quote, "You are aware we have already discussed with Mr. Clapp the theoretical incendiary applications of ball lightning that might be useful to the several German projects at Kirtland. Useful data should be routed to Mr. Clapp through this office." Close quote. Via the Freedom of Information Act, a whole host of documents from the files of Harness Cavalier, now numbering more than 120, have surfaced, demonstrating that those attached to the project were kept well informed of any and all developments in the field of ball lightning, and particularly how it might be exploited militarily. Such documentation includes theory of the lightning ball and its application to the atmospheric phenomenon called flying saucers, written by Carl Benedicts in 1954. Ball lightning, a survey, prepared by one J.R. McNally for Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. D.V. Ritchie's Red May Use Lightning as a Weapon, which appeared in Missiles and Rockets in August 1959, and an experimental and theoretical program to investigate the feasibility of confining plasma in free space by radar beams, which was written by C.M. Holland in 1960 for the Armor Research Foundation, Illinois Institute of Technology. The strongest evidence that confirms Edgewood Arsenal's deep interest in the potential use of ball lightning on the battlefield can be found in December 1965 document entitled Survey of Kugelblitz, Theories for Electromagnetic Incendiaries, written by W.B. Little and C.E. Wilson. The document was prepared under contract for the U.S. Army's New Concepts Division. Special Projects at Edgewood. In Halt's own words, a red sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point, it appeared to throw off glowing particles and then broke into 5 separate white objects and then disappeared. Immediately thereafter, 3 star-like objects were noticed in the sky. The object to the south was visible for 2 or 3 hours and beamed down a stream of light from time to time. To this writer, at least, reports of beams of light seen in conjunction with moving lights that emitted glowing particles sound very much like someone putting into practice the theoretical plans cited within the pages of the Survey of Kugelblitz Theory for Electromagnetic Incendiaries document, namely the control and utilization of ball lightning phenomena via lasers. Indeed, Halt's reference to the object in the woods appearing to throw off glowing particles sounds astonishingly like the words the U.S. Weather Bureau used back in 1948 to describe ball lightning. Quote, "It has been reported that the luminous body may break up into a number of smaller balls, which may appear to fall towards the earth like a rain of sparks. It has even been reported that the ball has suddenly ejected a whole bundle of many luminous radiating streamers toward the earth," close quote. Was some sort of clandestine experiment of the type envisaged in the 1965 Edgewood Arsenal documentation secretly undertaken in Brindlesham Forest in 1980? It should be noted that practically all of those implicated in the affair were members of the U.S. military. In view of this, it may very well be an indication that someone was very interested in determining the psychological reactions of military personnel when confronted by phenomena perceived to be both extremely unusual and potentially extraterrestrial in origin. There is one final issue that may be of relevance to this latter point. The Edgewood Arsenal's biomedical laboratory was, from 1952 to at least 1974, the site of a series of controversial experiments that involved the extensive testing of hallucinogens such as THC and BZ, as well as a dizzying variety of chemical and biological agents on military personnel. That some of the witnesses to the Rendlesham events reported having been drugged by unknown officials in the immediate wake of the affair might not be as unbelievable as it initially sounds. There are weapon systems that operate on the power of the mind and whose lethal capacity has already been demonstrated. Jacques Vallée remarks that Alexander considers that we should, quote, not just limit the input to sightings of hard physical objects, close quote, noting that this has also been the view of other researchers, including Jacques Vallée. We agree that at times hard physical craft exist, but there is much more to the phenomena, noting that UFO reports have changed over time. This observation points to the conclusion that many of the physical craft that are seen tend to be in advance of current technology, but not beyond the understanding of human consciousness, close quote. Jacques Vallée. There you have it. That's episode 3. And now we're ready for the post-show panel, which we will begin now. I want to thank all of you first for joining us. I want to thank everybody for following us on our YouTube channel and on social media. The response has been fantastic, and all of you have really been supercharged up about the format and about the content that we're bringing on Phenomenon Radio, the weaponization of UAP. And we're really excited about that. We're looking forward to bringing more content in the future at a more consistent pace. We're doing the best we can. We all have jobs. We all have stuff going. And, we're all doing our daily lives. And this is kind of our secondary thing. So we're doing the best we can to bring you as much as we can, as soon as we can. And we thank y'all for your support, truly. Well, let me bring in John Burroughs, James Warrow, and Simon Holland, the group. I call them the group, the clique, the Phenomenon Radio Clique. Now, guys, it's good to see all of you. Welcome back to Post Phenomenon Show panel, and we covered a lot of stuff in this edition, in the third edition. And if I'm, I don't know what you guys' take is, but I'm just going to go on the record and say this one hits real hard. This one, I think, the other two have been good in delivering and setting up a lot of what everybody is getting in this episode. Right. So I've got some quick questions because we're really tight on time this week to make the 1 hour deadline. But I'm going to start with John. John, you did FOIA to the MOD. And, we talked, this is included in this episode and then, and others, but wanted to really quickly, have you briefly tell us about what was in those FOIAs and, what was the response from the MOD?
Well, with the MOD, I had some inside information from some documents that I had in my possession about the possibility of weaponization that may be going on. And the MOD was responding back to me where the American government wasn't. So all I simply did was ask them some questions that led up to the big question was simply, are you weaponizing UAP technology? And as you can see from the show, they acknowledged they were. And they threw the kitchen sink at me why they couldn't divulge what it was and how they were doing it because of their own company, it was companies within the defense industry. It would have been interrelations between probably the United States. They didn't say, but that would probably be the country they're working with, and also that it would be a threat. The advancement of this weaponization would be a threat if another country found out about it as they were developing it. So as far as that goes, it's clear that the United Kingdom acknowledged they were working on weaponization of UAPs. And in the United States government, when they held the congressional hearings, question came up about that. And the briefer said we had to take the answer behind closed doors. So they're clearly looking and working on weaponization of UAPs.
Yeah, that's something that truly, I think deserves a lot more skepticism. We really need to dig a lot more into some of those responses because, there's a lot of cryptic stuff in those. But, in this episode, we talked about Kit. Of course, Kit Green he's one of those figures that certainly was all over the world when it comes to UAP. And God, I just wish we could unlock his brain and see what he's seen and know what he knows. But his statement about hundreds of service people being injured by UAP exposure. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, when he came on, what he did was, he helped behind the scenes. He said he was going to keep it private about getting me treatment for my injuries. And then after it all, happened and was accomplished, and then the lawyer, Pat Frascogna, and I just announced to everybody that I was taken care of and thank you for your support. And at that point, I just figured I'd just fade away because I got what I asked for. I was going to survive. It was clear I wasn't going to get the answers. Not only did the aides from McCain's office and Kyle, first of all, say that they were going to get me care, but I wasn't going to find out what happened. And even though he'd given me openings to understand some of what happened to me, that's as far as they would go. They weren't giving me the full Monty, the full, open door to what was taking place and what injured me. But other than what he said in the above top secret post that he put out there on his own, he just sent an email to Pat and I saying, hey, I'm just acknowledging the above top secret that I was involved in, and this is what happened to you. And he did. And it kind of shook him up, because above top secret, people don't know, that site is full of debunkers, and they just didn't know what to do with it, because they were actually questioning whether or not I was actually injured at the time, or were my records classified. And he kind of went in and said they were. So they didn't know what to do with it. So yeah, he's been involved in this all the way back during the time frame when the Rendlesham incident happened. He was on the weird desk. So the guy has a lot of knowledge. He's driven a lot of projects, and yeah, it would be nice to see him open up more, but I doubt if he will, because most of probably what he knows is still classified.
I want to tell you something. That letter that he posted in above top secret, which he is vested in, that site and others, was really, it was compelling, to say the least, to me. I mean, his admission to, almost like a bystander that's looking at servicemen who have been affected by things, and because of the complications as to what it was that affected them, has prevented them from getting the proper treatment and care and that type of thing. Really admitting that it hurts these scientists who have to stand back and watch this happen. And I mean, I really could see, and this is just my opinion, you guys, but I really could see, based on what I read, I could see this man knowing what was going on and was there. You know what I mean? And he knew what was going on ahead of time, and he knew that it was affecting these servicemen and women in various ways, and they wanted to be right there to care for them and observe them and study them and all that. But the long term seemed to be in conflict with how that went down. So, with that said, does that mean that, it was us testing? Right. That's where that first question mark sort of popped in over my head back then, that, wait a minute, this may not have been actually. And then later, John divulged something to me in a photograph that they had, he had been doing some study on. And I don't know if, John, if you've gone public with that or not, you can say about it or not. But like, it looked like the confirmation that he was actually there then. And so, if that's the case, that really begs to question, what, was this some sort of a government test or training, or of some kind? Not training, but test for sure. And that's where we are, right, Simon? That's where we are today here. That's why
I think it's absolutely fascinating. And, the connection of Stanford's research, who were obviously stayed on after Cobra Mist closed down, and their relationship with Martlesham Heath and with Bentwaters. Something was going on. I'm sure John knows more than, and I'm so respectful that he knows stuff and is asking us to find it out without actually telling us, which is great. I believe there was man-made powers involved. Whether those powers unleashed something dangerous or unknown is a fantastic question that we are looking into. But, I think Dr. Kit Green came across very well. I have a question for James. Maybe James can answer this. I've never been somebody who's used forums. Why do you think the CIA chief medical officer, he might not have been at the time, but that was his role, went on what seems to me a bit like a dark web forum for ufologists to open up? It was an amazing letter that Race pointed out. What is above top secret, James? Can you describe its history and who runs it?
Well, apparently, don't quite me on this. Apparently, he did have a few shares in ATS along with a few others. But I think he sold them off and stuff. But he was still, you know, keeping an eye on what was going on there,
Right.
because ATS, you could go on there under a pseudonym and you could talk
Right.
about things, and you felt that you won't get a knock on the door, basically.
Okay.
And you know, there was many things on ATS that you could publish that would probably not be allowed to publish, or you get an error 404 come up if you try to use
Right.
it too much or for too long publicly. Even down to things like extremely low frequency, extremely low frequencies. And that would
Right.
seem to be a sort of a no-no. I think as soon as we started going into that extremely low frequencies, and when we started getting into talking about plasma, I mean, I was on ATS literally myself. You know, I was one of the people on there on this
Right.
forum. Again, the reason I kept my name secret was because I was working with John, and I didn't want him to get in trouble. I didn't want myself getting in trouble. But I just wanted to get on there to just clear a few bits and pieces. And I think
the forum it still exists today, and we can.
It does,
You know,
yeah, it does.
Right.
It still
Okay.
exists today. I mean, I came out of there ages ago, you know, because things were
Okay.
just being manipulated by certain members within the group that have been there
Right.
from day one.
Okay.
And
Right.
say Kit Green got on there and he posted this thing. He must have been watching it. He must have had an inkling, because there's so many different sites on. There's so many different categories on the
Okay.
ATS site. For him to actually go onto that particular one, where we were talking about certain things, he must have either someone told him or he was watching it himself, because he went on there to try to say, right, that's it. You know, this is what happened. You know, leave it there. This is my statement. Leave it there. But obviously, that you're just feeding. If anything, it didn't stop anything. It fed even more to people that were trying to look at the other side of things, not UFOs, but looking at, is it man-made? You know, and it really opened up that sort of Pandora's box almost.
Right.
You know, when it comes to researching different frequencies and how we have tried to manipulate, you know, frequencies and use them for detection, and, you know, creating LiDAR and things like that, you know, and weaponized weapons and stuff like that as well, especially from 1976. I mean, we had the microwave embassy siege, microwave embassy, and that was being bombarded with microwaves, and that was being heavily looked at, and that was pretty much secret. You know, the people in the building at the time didn't know what was going on. They was getting ill and all sorts, but they let people carry on. You know, they let people carry on working there, and just to find out whatever this was and what was affecting them. And when you look at some of the statistics on what was going on, it sounds very much like the Havana syndrome that we talk about today.
It does. Okay. Thank you, James.
Above top secret for me, man, it was, you know, Simon, it was interesting you put it like dark web type. Back then,
I didn't know.
There were some really serious players that were dropping verbiage in there. A lot. I mean, you know, John, you remember Bill Moore and how the story of Bill Moore went, and how he, you know, he got played and he got manipulated, and then he found out that he got played and he got manipulated, and then he disclosed that out there in Laughlin, and those people were ready to take fire hoses to him. You know, they thought that he, you know, they wanted to believe everything he had been spitting out up to that point. They didn't want to believe that it was all BS. And I think a lot of those people that the Avery and all that, I think a lot of those people were involved in Above Top Secret Live. Because I syndicated their radio show. They had a podcast that Above Top Secret Live, and I syndicated it for years. And I knew all those guys. So, you know, it was anybody that was interested deeply in what was going on in this subject, they frequented that place. And I don't think there was a handful of people that ever used their real name or ID in any way whatsoever. But, you know, James, you always have such interesting insights on these things, and I agree with everything you just said there. But the subject in this episode of high strangeness and and Jacques Vallée, I want to get some clarification. Tell our viewers out here, define for them high strangeness, and tell us a little bit about who Jacques Vallée is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we've had a lot of new people that have come into the subject that can understand how we're presenting all of this, and they're able to absorb it. That over the World Wide Web, it gets too complicated. There's no backstory, there's no context, right, and they get lost. So I just thought it might be good for us to cover that real quick.
Right, quickly. Jacques Vallée, obviously a French gentleman. I've already mentioned he worked at the Paris Observatory for the French Space Committee, and he witnessed destructions of radar tapes and all manner of signal tapes and stuff from apparently UFOs and things they couldn't identify. He moved to the United States in the 60s. From memory, he came in contact with Alan J. Hynek, and he was also involved in the Project Blue Book as well, back in the days when they was trying to collate data on UFOs. He eventually went on his own and started writing books about the phenomena, and within the circles of many people that he interacted with, including like some top officials from governments from all around the world, as well as scientists and physicists, academics. He joined with Eric Davis looking at this UAP UFO issue, and he felt that he really needed to be able to identify from false misidentifications from real events, because there was a lot of, as I said, a lot of skullduggery going on, and it has been for years. So they wrote a paper which was called, let me just read it out to you because it's a mouthful: Incommensurability, Orthodoxy and the Physics of High Strangeness. And they created a 6-layer model for anomalous phenomena. Now, the high strangeness is part of all 6 layers of identification of interactions with UFOs or UAPs. There's many. There's psychic effects. There's actual manifestations of craft and people and things and whatever you want to describe what's in front of you. There was anti-physical effects, so we're talking about, like what you see in reported like nosebleeds and all sorts. But I think if he came up with a lot of, how do I say this? He came up with a lot of the ideas that we're seeing looked at now, years ago, and only now are they starting to really kind of tuck into some of these research and what he actually put together to try to come to some sort of conclusion. Is this a phenomena? And if it is, what is it? And how can we identify it as being an unknown? And that's what it was pretty much set up for, the paper that he wrote with Jacques Vallée and Davis. But when you look at the 6 layers, each one of those, if you look through the 6 layers from the paper, each one of those can be utilized as a form of weapon in the sense of the effects, the psychological factors in what people see, even the psychic aspects of things, which goes back to your remote viewing. There's if you actually look at these things, you can actually study some of these within the UAP, and you can unfortunately some of it you can link to non-lethal weapons, or some of it you can link to lethal weapons, which I think is possibly why there was a lot of backing off on some of this, because I say from 1976 onwards, the West and the East were trying to create microwave weapons to harm individuals, and like I said, like the Moscow incident, where the Russians were trying to apparently microwave the embassy there.
Yeah.
And the West and that needed to be able to identify what was being done to the people there. Therefore you have to create whatever they were creating, and then find a countermeasure for such things. And during the Cold War, lots of this was wrapped up in lots of this. I think that's why a lot of it was kind of put down to aliens. A lot of it was put down to look this way, don't look that way.
Right. Right.
And we even go back to 1977 in Colares in Brazil. We had lasers coming down from the sky, apparently, and they was injuring people, and a few people died there. We don't seem to hear too much about that. And when we come,
there was a lot of physical effects from that event.
There was. Now again, we have to look at, was it man-made or was it ET? And when you look deeper into, I think it was Operation Prato, when you look deeper into the incidents themselves, and the colonel himself, who started talking about aliens, he started talking about things with big heads, but unfortunately the guy ended up committing suicide, the colonel. And to me, that sounded like another Benowitz case gone too far.
Supposedly.
Can I add something on Jacques Vallée? A couple of things real fast. He did an interview on Coast. He did an interview on Coast where he said he thought what happened at Rendlesham was a military experiment, and he got an immediate response back from Colonel Halt saying it wasn't. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an immediate response. And most people probably don't know this, but he was a consultant for Close Encounters, which had to do with frequencies and communication with ET. So those are two interesting things that he did that tie into some of this too also.
Yeah, think about it. Think about one of the most classic E.T. movies of all time, Steven Spielberg, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was a term that he coined, third kind, that Jacques Vallée coined. But the thing is people don't really understand that they were using sound. They were using wave technology with light to communicate with these ETs. And essentially that's where we are today with all of this. So that's interesting, John, for sure. But Jacques Vallée is a deep cat, man. He's an entrepreneur. He's done data mapping, and I mean the construct of a lot of things for the government computer wise he's done. We could go on that for forever, but you did a great job there, James, with sort of briefing us on that. Simon, look, real quick, I wanted to jump over you. Andrew Pikes, tell us a little bit about the radar from Foo Fighters to the RFI. This was a big part of context in the show.
It's an amazing piece of research, and I think that it's all about what the United Kingdom were specifically interested in, is looking at advanced physics and building a directed energy weapon. And I think radar is very important. I think Britain wrongly thinks it almost invented it. It didn't. And I think there's a lot of research, first by British government laboratories at Bawdsey and at Malvern and things, into radar, not only for seeing things, but possibly as a directed energy weapon. And I think Andrew mentions that. And I think the most interesting thing, and a piece of inside information that I've just had this week, speaking to a RAF retired radar operator at Neatissham, up the road from Bentwaters, is that he confirms that Bawdsey had surface-to-air missiles with a very unique radar system, which is called a continuous wave. It's like a searchlight that can focus a beam onto a very narrow point, and instead of sending out pulses, actually sends a continuous flashlight beam onto something to really help direct the surface-to-air missile. But that technology also can produce ionization of our atmosphere. Given enough power, oh, hang on a minute, Bawdsey was connected to possibly to Sizewell nuclear power station, and so was Orford Ness. So there's a smoking gun here. And Andrew certainly looked into the whole of the British involvement in radar and directed energy weapons. We need to look into it more.
1,000%, I agree with you. That radar is an essential clue. That is our admissible evidence, right? I mean, we could literally take radar into a court of law to convict the U.S. government on a cover-up, because we have technology that can detect physical objects that are doing things that we can't explain physically by our laws of physics. So, oh my God, we're running out of time. JB, real quick, I want to throw it over to you about, because this was something really important to us all, about what you saw and what was going on at Kirkland Air Force Base in New Mexico.
Well, I was there at the end of '99, and they were working on SDI. So at that point, 747s were the planes they were using to fly up over these sites, these laser sites and stuff out in the desert. And there's quite a light show that would go on every night, including some interesting things in the sky, including you would see some of these blue. At the time, again, I hadn't looked into it very deeply at that point, nor had James exposed to me what the plasmas could do with lasers. But you could see these blue lights dancing around in the sky, going, leapfrogging each other, splitting into different lights. Like you'd have one, all of a sudden split into 4 or 5. So at that point, right there and there, I started saying, whoa, wait a minute, if they're doing it now, what were they capable of doing this back in 1980? And James confirmed that they were. So and SDI, for most people that, I thought it was Reagan's idea and it went forward from there. They were working on SDI in the 70s over in the United Kingdom with Marconi Company. So there's documents to support that. So there's a lot to this. And we're going to keep digging, folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, absolutely. John, James, Simon, thank you again for another amazing episode 3. All of you guys did so much work. All I do is talk. I've got the easy job out of all of this, but working with you guys, it's phenomenal. And I want to thank you, James. Thank you, man, for all the research, the deep dives you, man. And you've been doing this for a long time, and we're privileged to have you on the team. Of course, John, you and your experience and your dedication and your passion to running down the truth to what happened to you and your fellow airmen. And then Simon, your entire volume of experience and skill sets coming to bear and donating your time with us and helping us and then joining this team. So it's amazing to work with you all. And I want to thank you, because here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at the close of another show. We all want to thank you for your support. Go over to youtube.com @Phenomenon Radio and check us out. Check out what we've got over there, because there are a lot of Phenomenon Radio shows that are being uploaded every week from the original version. We're bringing back the original version of Phenomenon Radio Show with John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe. There was a lot of research. You're going to see, you're going to hear. I'm so used to saying see now that we do video. Back then, we, it's all radio, but, you're going to hear James Warrow on a lot of those shows, because even back then, John and Linda were bringing him in, to bring his expertise and research to bear on this subject back then. And this is not, UAP and the study of weaponization is not brand new. It is to a lot of you, but there are a lot of us that were looking at it a long time ago. So those will continue to be uploaded. We intend to upload the entire volume of Phenomenon Radio Classics, Remastered Classics there. It's going to take us some time to do it, because there were a lot of them, 4 seasons, almost 4 full seasons. So there's a lot there. Also, go check out Professor Simon's YouTube channel, youtube.com at Professor Simon, right, Professor Simon? Isn't that it?
Yeah, thank you.
And he just hurdled 100,000 subscribers. So for all of you that support the amazing Professor Simon, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Number 4 is in the works. We'll have it ready for you in a couple of weeks from tonight. We'll have it presented to you, God willing.
Yeah.
So for myself, Ray Hobbs, for John Burroughs, James Warrow, and Professor Simon Holland, thank you all for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.